I'm going to be sharing with you one of our viewers' stories that was submitted to us through our YouTube channel. My name is Tara Crawford. I'm a search angel here at DNAngels. Keith is a DNAngels client. And from watching our YouTube channel, he decided that he would like us to share his story. And that's what I'm going to be doing today in Keith's own words. Now, you're going to want to stay tuned and listen to this because this is Keith's story about adoption and how he believed everything that he was told until one day he discovered a secret no one expected. His story contains lies, sealed records, and a missing father. Let's go ahead and drop some green hearts in the comments because we're going to be supporting Keith with his courage of being able to share his own story with all of you. This is Keith's story told by Keith. I was born in Virginia in the 1950s. I was adopted and raised by two great parents just over 3 months after I was born. The only information they knew about my biological parents was that I had been given the name of Frank by my birth or bio mother, and they were only told vague information that she could not take care of me, so she gave me up for adoption at 10 days of age. That was what they were told. The only paper documentation they were given was the official adoption decree, which was issued almost a year and a half after I was adopted, but which only became official with this decree, which was in December of 1957. The decree copy of my parents were given was provided by the lawyer handling their case or adoption and was in a nice small folder labeled with the lawyer's name. That was all they had. I always knew I was adopted, and frankly, it was no big deal at all to me, and I rarely even thought about it. Only when I was prompted by someone talking about adoption or something, and I would realize that, oh, wait, I'm adopted. But it was just never something I thought about as a kid, as I was always treated like any other kid, as a member of the family, which of course I was. All relatives on both sides of my parents, including grandparents, aunts, and uncles, as well as cousins, all treated me as family, which again, I was legally, so no issues at all growing up, and frankly, even to this day. However, having said all of this, after I became an adult and in my late 20s, I guess there was one time where the topic of adoption came up somewhere. I honestly don't remember when or where that was, but it prompted me to wonder really why I was given up for adoption and what my biological mother looked like. Those were really the only two questions I had, and that was it. Finally, sometime around late 1986, I was going back to the city in Virginia where I was born, and I decided I would look around while I was there, basically going to find if that lawyer who had handled my parents' case where I was adopted was still in business. It turned out that indeed his office was still around, but they had had a fire several years earlier, and all the records from those olden days were gone. However, they did tell me that it was comparatively easy to find out my adoption information, as Virginia laws had changed by then. All I had to do was obtain a form, complete the form, and mail it into the Virginia court system, along with a nominal filing fee, and that was it. How it worked was that basically with that form, I was filing a suit against the state of Virginia to have my adoption records opened. When the court receives the form, a judge then orders Department of Social Services in the city where I was born to search for and obtain consent from my biological parents, wherever they are, in order to then be able to release my adoption records. If bioparental consent is not given, then I lose my case to have my records open. So in late 1986, Virginia Social Services began their search for my biological parents. They located the bio mother who was living in California by then. She was of course surprised to hear that I was searching for her, and she had very much gave her consent to have identifying information from the adoption records released. However, she stated that the person who was my biological father had died before she gave birth and didn't even know she was pregnant. She stated that she and her husband at the time were living with her mother, who was an alcoholic. She said that one day her mom was threatened to kill her with a knife, and her husband took her to a ferry boat and went over to Portsmouth, Virginia, where he put her on the boat along with about $20 and told her to go to Portsmouth where she would be safe and he would follow along after he dealt with her mother. According to BioMother, he never followed, and a couple of weeks later, she called over to the eastern shore of Virginia, where they had been living with her mother, to inquire as to where he was, only to be told that he had died. No other information was given to BioMother, she said, and she just went about with her life there in Portsmouth, never returning to the eastern shore. That in and of itself is somewhat strange. But the story she told was that she couldn't afford the fare of the ferry ride back to the eastern shore because she had spent the $20 she was given on a rent for a room and food. This was the story she says she was told. As to what happened to the man she said was my biological father and who was also her husband. However, social services could not verify her story because they could not find any confirmation of the death of this man, who she stated was my biological father. Consequently, since they could not confirm the information BioMother gave to the social service worker, and therefore could not obtain his consent to have adoption records and his identity disclosed, I was only given a partial release of information, and my records were not released but kept sealed. I was only told my contact information for my biomother, as she had consented to that being provided to me. The social services worker called me late one afternoon, sometime in late summer. I honestly don't remember the exact date and time, but I seem to remember it as being around August of 1987. I do remember, though, that I was sitting in my chair watching Gomer Pyle on TV when the phone rang. I was not disappointed with the adoption records not being released at that time because I just figured I could ask my bio mother any questions I had, such as a bio father's name. But the social services worker had told me that during her conversations with bio mother, that bio mother didn't seem credible, especially since almost nothing she said could be corroborated. So social services worker told me to basically be aware of that when I contacted bio mother. So what did I do after I received that call from social services? I had been giving contact information for BioMother, including a phone number and mailing address. This was way before email, text, etc. I decided right then that I just could not pick up the phone and call. So I sat down and wrote a handwritten letter, single paced on yellow lined paper, that ended up being 4 pages in length. Yes, it was a long letter, but I mean, how do you write a letter like that? And at that time, I was then 31 years old. So how do you summarize 31 years in a letter? But I wrote the letter, mailed it off, and just waited. A few days later, I received a call from Bio Mother, which I probably should have expected, but honestly didn't expect. She was so happy to learn of my wanting contact and learning what had happened to me after I was adopted. We talked for a while, and during the conversation, she told me that I also had 2 half sisters. I had honestly not even considered the possibility of having any siblings, as it just had not crossed my mind. So that was a real surprise to me, and I was very interested in learning more about them. Bio mother, though, told me the name of the man who she said was my bio father and who she had been married to when I was conceived, and that he died before even knowing she was pregnant with me. So he did not know of my existence. She also told me at that time that she did not give me up for adoption, but the state of Virginia had taken me away from her when I was 10 days old. As I grew up, and as I said, that was just one of the couple of tidbits that my parents had been given during the adoption process, that I had been given up for adoption at 10 days of age. But BioMother said the state of Virginia took me away from her and that she did not want to give me up for adoption. After growing up, as the years went by, that story just seemed to raise questions because, I mean, for one thing, how could a state just come in and take a child away and have him adopted out? And just more simply, how did they even find out about me and what caused them to want to take me away from my bio mother in the first place? Again, simple questions that made bio mother's story seem a little strange. Of course, this made me realize why it was that the social service person who found her had stated that bio mothers seemed to lack credibility during their conversations. But the weeks and months went by there in 1987. I was feverishly writing back and forth with Biomother as well as both of my newly discovered half sisters. I finally got to the point that I could not wait any longer. And late in November of 1987, I decided to fly out to California for the weekend to meet my half sisters and Biomother. I flew out on a Friday night, arriving at LAX around 11:30 p.m. I was met there by one of my half sisters named Cecilia and her husband. Believe me, it was a Twilight Zone moment when I met her, as I could really see the resemblance between us. Pictures were taken at that moment, and after that, I was so dead tired that I checked into my hotel and they went back home. We agreed that I would drive out to their home the next morning, which I did. I drove to Cecilia's house the next morning, and after talking there for a while, she asked if I wanted to go meet Biomother then. So we drove there, each in our own vehicles, and I wanted an option to leave just in case. I will always remember pulling up in front of the house where Biomother was living. It had a sewer truck parked in the driveway, as she was living with a man who worked for some sewer company. The house, though, looked like a dump to me with one of those screen doors with a spring on it. So when you open the door and let it go, it would swing back closed with a big noise, which was just annoying. The screen had a hole in it too and just made the whole place look even more rundown. Biomother was standing there in the door as I walked up. I had not at all thought about what I was going to say or do when I got to the door. I just remember saying something like, "Hi, I'm your long lost son." She invited me in along with half sister Cecilia. I remember the house was just awful, and I do not think I was a snob or anything, just it was not the kind of place I've ever seen. I remember most that there were blank, darker spots on the walls where pictures had hung but were no longer there. I was just thinking, can't you people even afford a gallon of paint to paint these walls? Bio Mother offered me something to eat or drink, and I politely said no because, in all honesty, I didn't want to eat anything because the place just seemed so filthy to me. Anyway, we all talked, getting to know each other a little. Although, since we had exchanged many mails during the previous months, it was more of a chance to just see and interact with each other. The other bio half sister, Valerie, was in the bedroom and she came out a few minutes later. I then had the guy Biomother was living with take my camera, and I had him take a few pictures of Biomother, the two half sisters, and myself posting on the couch, as I wanted a family portrait of all of us together. I think two or three pictures were taken, and since this was back in the olden days of 1987, there was no digital cameras, and film was used. So I just hoped the pictures would turn out okay. They did. I don't remember exactly how long I was actually there, but I do not think it was more than an hour before I just wanted to leave. I was polite about it and left under good circumstances. That was the one and only time I ever saw Biomother again. As social service workers had warned me about, Biomother was not very credible. And while she did answer my questions about my bio father, at the same time, she was somewhat upset that I was asking questions about him rather than about her. But she just didn't get it that I had to ask her because she was the only one who knew anything about him. So over time, we just didn't click. And she was very frustrated with me, and I was very frustrated with her for just not providing the information that was credible. I did finally get some concrete information from her that I felt I could check out. I asked her when and where she and the man she had told me was my bio father got married. So, with that information, I got on the phone and called the office in Maryland, where she said they had gotten married. And I just asked the lady on the phone if she had any marriage records for people with those names. Literally, in less than a minute, she said that yes, she was looking at the record right then. I asked her if I could be sent a copy. She said yes, there is a fee of 50 cents. I told her I would mail it to her, which I did. I got the marriage certificate, and that was the first piece of concrete information I had regarding my bio mother and bio father. From that, I learned, first of all, the ages she had told me that she was and the bio father was were incorrect. She had told me that she was 19 and he was 57 when they got married, when in fact, she was 21 and he was 45. Still, quite an age difference, but quite different than what she had told me. In fact, the story she told, and yes, it is quite crazy, was that how they met, that he had been hired to paint the house of her mother. And after he painted it, her mother told him that she didn't have the money to pay him. Bio mother then said that bio father told bio mother's mother that if she would give her daughter, bio mother, to him, he would marry her and forgive the money she owed for painting the house. And guess what? That is exactly what the mother did. She gave her daughter, my bio mother, to him and he married her. Now, that is the story bio mother told me. When I got the marriage certificate, though, because it had the ages of both of them, I was able to search on the internet and found bio father, finally, because I had the right age. Before that, I had found him or someone with his name, but because the ages were different from what bio mother had told me, I didn't think he was the right person. But now that I had a correct age, I found him and then began researching him. I found out that he had two children by a first marriage to someone else, and he had divorced that woman, or in fact, she had divorced him, saying he had been abusive to her in the marriage. I got their divorce papers as well as their marriage license too. When I told my own mother that he had been married before they met and had two children, she did not believe it and said my information was wrong, but I knew it was the truth, and again, her credibility was not there at all. Over the years, I found out pretty much everything about this man, who bio mother had said was my bio father. In fact, I did find that unlike the story she told to me and the social services person, he did not die before I was born, but in fact lived another 13 years before he died in 1968 or something. So, of course, the revelation brought up more questions, such as what really happened between them and what caused her to move to Portsmouth, Virginia. Why didn't he come with her, etc. I also learned that only a few years after I was born, bio father remarried to his now third wife. Now, again, another question arises, which is if bio mother stated, which she did, that he had died only days after she left. And of course, there was no record of that. How was that she later remarried herself if in fact he was still alive and there was no divorce? Because as she stated, he had died. It is easy to see how she lacked credibility because everything she said could not be corroborated and lacked sense of logic. So that was a big question. I searched for divorce records under his name and bio mothers only to find nothing of a divorce between them. So were they both then bigamous because they each remarried without a divorce? How can that be? We fast forward to around September of 2020, when I learned the state of Virginia had changed its adoption record rules again, in fact, making it much easier to obtain adoption records. There was no court involvement anymore, and one simply had to request by completing a form, and the records be opened. However, this time, because I had years of documentation of all the people involved, such as death certificates, etc., I felt like I had a good chance of having the records opened. Sure enough, in early 2021, I received a complete copy of my adoption records, but they were severely redacted. I mean, there was so much magic marker spread on them that really they were of almost no help at all. The lady from social services had told me that even though they were redacted, that because I had so much information anyway, that I would be able to figure it out. Well, that was not true at all. This social services person, though, told me that their office had no authority to authorize a complete and unredacted copy of the adoption records to be released, as I would have to go through the main office in Richmond, Virginia, which was the state headquarters of social services for that state of Virginia, and do an appeal with them. Again, another form, but that was all I had to do. I received a call from a nice lady there who said that she thought I would have no problem at all in obtaining the complete, unredacted records, since I had such good documentation of everyone involved. She said she would forward the documentation up the ladder, getting it signed off by everyone up to the director of social services, and she would let me know once it had all been approved. She let me know towards the end of 2021, which was a great Christmas present. And literally on the last day of 2021, December 31st, I had a delivery of a thick envelope via UPS from the state of Virginia Department of Social Services which contained my complete adoption records along with all related court documents. And it was all open, unredacted, and somewhat clear to read. It had originally been typewritten, single space, and had gotten somewhat yellowed from the age of the years, and then, of course, had to be copied, so it was somewhat hard to read. But my complete story was there. And man, what a story those records contained. Many questions I had and that came up during the years were pretty much all answered by those documents. They were a treasure trove of information. And honestly, the reading of those papers was just so fascinating that it was like watching a riveting movie that you just could not even get up from to go to the bathroom. As I read each page, I couldn't wait to read the next page because I could not imagine what could come next. See, as it turned out, when someone wants to adopt a baby, they are investigated very well. Social services goes out, talks with their neighbors, friends, coworkers, employers, members of their church, and pretty much everyone who knew them. Those interviews were each documented in incredible detail, right there in the reports. It was like going back in time to see how things were at that moment. And it was cool to read the answers of people who knew my mom and daddy during those olden days of long ago. Meanwhile, another question was answered, which was how was it that social services got involved at all with investigating my biomother? Again, this is in the reports. It turns out that the delivery room doctor who delivered me, for some reason, had his own concerns about biomother being able to take care of me, and he was the person who actually called social services and started the whole investigation by them into my biomother. So they went out and talked to her and actually looked around the living space there in the residence for Biomother and where I was, what clothes I had, etc. As it turned out, Biomother had been keeping me in a box and she could not afford a baby crib. I had very few clothes, as again, she could not afford to buy any. I was not properly fed. I had a few minor health issues. Social services quickly came to the conclusion that I was not being properly taken care of and they just talked to Biomother about giving me a better life by agreeing to sign over adoption papers. The thing was, upon that first day of visitation by social services, because of what they saw there, they immediately had me taken away from her while they conducted their investigation, and I was placed with temporary foster families who worked continually with social services just for such occasions. But according to the records, which were distinct, they clearly state that I was removed from the custody of Biomother at 17 days, not the 10 days Biomother had told me, and which was one of the few pieces of information that had been told to my parents when they were giving me for adoption. And also, she had said she never saw me again when they took me away. But again, in the records, it was noted that she had a visitation at social services office whenever she wanted to see her baby, me, which were supervised and only conducted at the social services office. During these meetings and visits to the home of Biomother, she finally agreed and said she was ready to sign over her baby for adoption, although it states in the records that she was reluctant to do so, but agreed that she just could not provide a good enough home financially. During the investigations by social services of Biomother, they also learned that she had, let's just say, a questionable way of earning money. She was working several bars, which were those bars that had rooms in the back where you could take the waitress and have fun for a price. That was how she made her money. Again, all of this was documented in the adoption records through interview with employers, coworkers, friends, etc. Now, having said all of this, it was also clearly stated in the records by my bio mother herself that she had no idea at all of who my bio father was. She admitted to sleeping with many men, and at the same time, around the time of my conception in 1955, while she was still technically married to the man she had said was my bio father. She also admitted, though, that while she hoped he was the father, that because she had moved out of their marital house only a month after being married, that it was very possible he was not the father. She said she went back and forth to the house and had relations with him, but she did this all at the same time she was sleeping with other men. So while there was certainly a possibility he could have been the father, there was also a good probability that he was not. But it is interesting that she clearly states for the official records back then by social services that she didn't know who the biofather was. But yet later on, when she had her two daughters by two different men, that she told them the same story she had told me about her first husband being my bio father when she was not sure or even had doubts that he was. Again, her credibility was lacking. But with the release of my complete adoption records, I was also provided with original letters signed by the Director of Social Services for the state of Virginia, addressed by the Director of Vital Records for the state of Virginia, ordering that director to release to me my original birth certificate should I so request it. I was given 2 originals signed by the Director of Social Services, as I was told that if I wanted this original birth certificate, that I should send one of them to the Director of Vital Records, along with my request for my original birth certificate. Of course, I requested that original, and while I had to hassle with them about it, despite my having that letter, they did finally relent, and exactly 66 years after the filing date of that original birth certificate, I received it in the mail. Again, what a treasure trove of information. I don't think most people know or ever think about it, but an original birth certificate is not at all like the ones you receive when you request a copy of your birth certificate over the years. The original is the one that was actually signed by the delivery room doctor, and the one where they show the time of birth, weight, delivery room, doctor name, birth of mother and father, and a whole other amounts of information. On my original birth certificate, the field for birth father was left blank, which again was one of those questions that I had wondered about, especially after receiving the adoption records. I had also wondered what exactly my original birth name was on that certificate, since so much else Biomother had told me had been bogus. But since birth father field was left blank, the doctor had to type in a reason at the bottom to explain why the field was blank. He wrote in that Biomother admitted she did not know who the father was. So again, it was right there in the official records where she stated that she did not know who my bio father was. So after literally decades of thinking my bio father was one man who I had researched relentlessly, I now was at the beginning, not knowing who my bio father was. By this time, Biomother had died back in 2014, and she was of no help anyway. So I turned to good old half sister Cecilia, who was an amateur genealogist, and she offered to help me by analyzing my DNA results from Ancestry DNA. She worked very hard on it, and during that process, she learned about DNAngels.org. She suggested to me that I check out their Facebook group, which I did. Right away, I asked for a DNA angel and was assigned to one, Heidi. While many of the cases that DNA angels have are solved within hours or a few days of mine, of course, mine was not an easy one. It took months, and in the end, Heidi had to ask for help with my case, and she got it from Kate. Kate was the one who figured out who my bio father was, and I was sent the complete official report that she wrote up in determining who my bio father was. After reading that report, there is no doubt in my mind that my bio father was named Norris. He is dead now, but at least I know who he was. I have not done nearly the research I did on that person who bio mother had said was my bio father, and nobody from his family has come forth with any information about him, nor do they seem to really believe that he fathered a child that he knew nothing about, and it was me. So that is my story. And while I certainly left out a lot of detail, believe it or not, it is my story. The bottom line with me, though, is that all of this information and the story of my biological life was not something done out of a deep yearning for family I never had, because I did have a good family growing up and still do. I will always consider my adoptive parents as being my parents, which they are legally, and in every other sense of the word to me. I never refer to them as being my adoptive parents either, but only for the purposes of this email and when having to talk about the subject. Only then do I refer to them in that sense, and only for clarification purposes of the story. I had a happy life with them, and the sad thing is that they are long gone now. I visit their graves in the cemetery every time I go back to the East Coast. It is the first thing I do upon entering city limits, and the last thing I do before I leave. If you've ever searched for answers about where you come from, you're not alone. Keith's journey was long, painful, and full of twists, but the truth matters, and sometimes finding it changes everything. If you want your story to be heard, please reach out to us at stories@dnaangels.org and let us be your voice and retell your story, because maybe someone out there needs to hear it.